Thanks everybody for joining me on another episode of Tell Me Everything Fraud Girl Friday series. I'm your host, Danielle Spinelli, and today I have a super exciting guest with me. I think I'm going to call him now the fraud guy. I was talking about fraud boy. I was talking about fraud boy when I was talking to him, but I think it should be fraud guy. He's like the fraud guy. He knows all the things. So really excited for you to meet Jerry. He has been on CNBC. I'll touch on that in a second. I'll actually grab the link and throw that in the description as well so you guys can watch that piece because very informative. But Jerry's really been in the game for a long time. He'll go through that. Kind of give some history on him. So that way, when we have him coming on in the future episodes, he can just jump right in and give us all his tips and tricks. Lots of knowledge on fraud has really helped in a lot of different ways to make a change, not just preventing it and stuff like that. Like he's working with TIA to make a difference. He's part of their fraud task force and then is, big into the policy forum, which I think is key. Like if you guys know anybody out there that is part of any type of government official, blah, 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 we're at the point now where we need help from them. So we should go ahead and reach out. But no, Jerry's been in the game for a long time. Started off with Coyote, now RXO, but really developed their whole platform or their whole program of vetting and how to handle claims and cargo theft and find the freight and mitigating risk in that sense. So really excited to have Jerry on. We're going to mainly talk about the BOL cluster theft. If you missed last week's episode, no worries. This episode, Jerry does a great job at explaining what is cluster theft. That strategic theft, taking the small increments of freight and then really making a huge, large impact. I mean, and like he talks about, it's even like low value of food. Like I've seen it where it's like Gatorade bottles that they're dropping off at like a local convenience store for a discounted price because they can move that freight quickly. It's not serialized. It's consumed. So it's right off the shelf, right away. So it's very hard for officials to track down and, go from there. So really excited to have Jerry on and hope you guys really learn a lot from him. Let's jump in it. Thanks so much for joining me on the Fraud Girl podcast, Jerry. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Ever since I saw you on CNBC and becoming like a superstar, I always wanted to meet you. And then I met you in Birmingham. So I'm like, you got to come on my podcast.
Yeah. I just do this to protect my company, protect our clients, try to stop the bad guys. I don't like when people say, "Oh, you're a superstar." I'm a very humble, down-to-earth guy that just in my role just trying to stop the bad guys from hitting us. That's all.
So we won't make you fraud boy anyways.
There we go. Yeah, I'm fraud boy.
Yeah,
there we go.
Perfect. I love it. Awesome. Well, tell a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in logistics? How awesome you are, all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, currently, I serve on our as the director of risk management for Prosponsive Logistics. I've been with Prosponsive now for about 3 years. I've been in the industry for about 14. I started in 2011 with the company Coyote Logistics on the broker side of things. I initially started off just entry-level operations, so just talking to drivers, making sure they had all their pickup and delivery information, knowing where to go, directing them how to get there. If they had any issues, they would call in and we would handle and troubleshoot any issues. So really that's where I started. I just started building up a rapport with drivers. Prior to me joining the brokerage world, I was actually a driver.
Gotcha.
Short-lived. I wasn't the best driver, but but it at least gave me a rapport to speak to other drivers in the industry to relate to them and understand, their side of the business and how they operate as well. So that gave me keen insight into the driver side and the carrier side of the business. And that's why I joined Coyote back in 2011. And just grew up and just went up the ranks there at Coyote. Was promoted to weekend operations manager, then late night operations manager, then joined their issue resolution team. That team was primarily responsible for investigating any type of overage, shortages, damage, any type of theft situation, fraud situation, what have you. Like I like to tell people when stuff hits the fan, we got involved.
Yeah.
And from there, I just picked up a niche when it came to investigating cargo theft and fraud. So I joined that team back in 2013. I say that to give a little bit of background because the way we investigated theft and fraud back in, the 2010s is not the way we investigate fraud and theft nowadays. But back in the good old days, it was just straight theft. We knew the domestic crews. We knew
Mhm.
kind of their modus operandi, how they operated, what commodities they like to target, what areas of the country they operated, and then we dealt a lot with com check thefts and T-check thefts and fuel events and final pay scams and stuff of that nature. So that was the majority of stuff that we investigated back in 2013, and it's only grown to be more strategic and more convoluted, and now you have the international cruise
Yeah.
that's laying waste on our industry. So, but yeah, but basically that was my career there. I did when I was at Coyote, I was the first manager over our cargo security department. So I kind of with that niche, I built a department and a program centered around cargo security, theft prevention, fraud prevention, but also having an active plan in place if a theft was to occur,
Yeah.
and being very proactive instead of reactive, knowing the right people to call, having a law enforcement network, having a network of private investigators and insurance investigators that we can reach out to in certain regions when we knew we had a theft or loss. So I just built that program from the ground up. I started that program around 2015 for Coyote, and that's essentially what brought me to Prosponsive, because Prosponsive was having a lot of issues with theft and fraud on their side of things. And I, just being myself, I would talk to other brokers in the industry about what they were seeing. And one of the things that I started to realize was, the problem that we were having at Coyote in regards to theft and fraud, it wasn't just a Coyote issue, it
Right.
was an industry issue. And I felt as though we can get more law enforcement assistance and attention from the state and federal levels of law enforcement and of Congress folks if we really identified this as not a business to business issue,
Right.
but an industry issue. They are attacking the United States supply chain. So again, that's why I worked with other brokers to really understand what they were going through. Prosponsive was going through their issues at the time, and they were like, Jerry, like, you're helping us out and you're so great. Like, even though you work for a competitor, you're so willing to help us out. Like, we actually need you though.
Yeah.
We need
Something on
somebody
the
like
dark
you.
side. Yeah.
Right, exactly, and that was in 2022 when I finally joined Prosponsive to run their risk management department. To really help them, build a vetting process in place for the carriers that onboard for Prosponsive
Mhm.
to really protect us from any type of theft and fraud. So we look at certain indicators, and
Yeah.
we utilize a company called Highway
Mhm.
to help identify those indicators that really points to say, is this a good carrier that we can use in our network, or is this a shady individual potentially that we may want to exclude from our network? We built our vetting process from the ground up. And that vetting process has won us some industry awards and some recognition. We've been recognized twice already by CargoNet for being best in cargo security,
That's
for our
awesome.
size of a broker. So yeah, we were recognized for 2022 and 2024 this past year. So very proud of that accomplishment.
Yeah.
Also made me a little bit of an industry expert. So I was elected to the board for the Transportation Logistics Council in 2023,
Okay.
kind of being their expert on when it comes to theft and fraud. And then last year I joined the actually no, I'm sorry, this year I joined the TIA board of directors as well too. So helping out TIA is, in regards to, their members and helping their members investigate thefts and fraud that they have, but also implementing preventative measures to help prevent them from falling victim to theft and fraud as well too. So, I look at myself as not just a leader here at Prosponsive, but I'm an industry leader, and I'm really looking to help everybody, whether you're a broker, shipper, a carrier, what have you. It's all about educating and it's all about securing the US supply chain. There is no competition when it comes to me. The competition is us against the bad guys. The
Right.
good guys against the bad guys.
Right.
So that's the competition that I'm on. I'm on the good guy's side, and any way I can help, whether it's a competitor, whether it's a potential client, whether it's a carrier, whether it's a vendor that we work with that may be susceptible or have some gaps in their process and procedure, they may reach out to me and say, hey, just to be more attractive to our clients, even if you're not a potential client, how can we be better from a theft and fraud perspective, and what do you see and how can you help us? So, that's the way I kind of operate, and yeah, and
Very cool.
it's been a good experience over the last almost 15 years of my career.
That's really awesome. You and me are similar in that way where it's like I learned how to vet back by basically doing I was a carrier sales rep for 8 years and I did copper and electrical wire out of Georgia and then they went all over the place. But that's like the biggest
Mhm.
not the biggest thing I think that's stolen, but because nowadays they're stealing everything, but
Yeah.
copper is, high commodity and like it's not one that they vet as strongly as they do like electronics or and things like that. Very susceptible to fraud and theft. But anyways, but that's kind of same thing. Like I really love helping others. And so that's why I feel like you and me on here is like a perfect match made in fraud heaven, I guess you could say. Yeah, happy
Brilliant.
you're on. Whenever we were in Birmingham talking, my first like we you did your whole spiel. Love everything that you said. Very very informative, and we'll have to have you on like multiple times because there's so many different aspects to fraud that's why I honestly whenever I first started Fraud Girl, I was like, there's no way I'm going to have enough content to do every week. Like I was like, I'll just do like once a month, but then like I'm like, oh, actually, I have a ton to talk about. So this month is about BOL manipulation and cluster theft.
Yeah.
So I guess will you tell me your experience that you've had with that and whatever stories you may have or whatever you're willing to share on here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so cluster thefts is something that, I would say unfortunately we've seen on our end, and we've seen, other brokers in the industry, fall victim to this. But it was a new modus operandi that I would say we really started to see probably towards the end of last year.
Yeah,
And it's definitely started to grow substantially. And it's just like you said, it's BOL manipulation, but using AI technology to manipulate BOLs. And what the bad guys are typically trying to manipulate is quantity count and seal numbers. And the reason why they're doing that is if I can run a BOL, if I can pick up a shipment, run a BOL through an AI program, say, hey, change the quantity from 20 pallets to 2 pallets, and or change the seal number from, the seal number that was at the shipper to another seal number that I apply after the fact. That's what the bad guys are doing. And they're doing it so well to where it's very hard to detect.
yeah,
And back in the day when we saw BOLs being manipulated, we could see like the whiteout that they were trying to use to manipulate the BOL, and it was a little obvious. Sometimes it was harder. Some were harder to detect than others. But now with the explosion of AI tools, it's very, very easy to manipulate it and without any sign of manipulation whatsoever. So the bad guys know this and will take advantage of that. A lot of times, the bad guys that are committing this type of fraud, they look completely good on paper.
yeah,
I mean, everything looks good. They check all the cross all the T's, dot all the I's. They meet all your vetting requirements, even your more stricter vetting requirements.
yeah,
And on paper, they want to look good.
yeah,
So they are going to present themselves as legitimate, and they're going to use legitimate means to get set up. They may even run shipments in your network legitimately. Pick up, deliver, no issue, no problem.
yeah.
Because they want to run under the guise that they are legitimate, but they are solely set up to be turned and burned and to commit this type of fraud. They want to try to build trust with that broker that they're working with. So they'll take 5 loads and they'll take it at a really good rate where you're making killer margin and you're like, oh man, this carrier is great. They pick up on time, they deliver on time.
Good communication,
And the reason why
wells on time. Like they're the best. Yeah,
they're the best because they want you to give them more freight. They want you to dedicate them to a lane. That's what they're looking for. They want to be dedicated to a lane. But what they're really doing is on whatever lane you dedicate them to, they're going to start doing the research. They're going to start seeing how the shipper operates,
yeah,
how the receiver operates, how you communicate on that particular shipment. Does the shipper really look at everything that they're loading up, or does the consignee do a check against the quantity count? Are they utilizing the straight paper BOLs or e-BOLs?
mhm,
And they look at all those instances, the entire operation of a shipment, to
yeah,
see if there's any gaps, right? To see if there's any way they can infiltrate without any suspicion. And what they really try to hone in on is high volume accounts. So that's going to be your food shippers. Your
Yeah.
food shippers are big. And why they target food shippers? Because they're moving food commodities, and pretty much once the food is brought and sold by the bad guys, the evidence is gone, right? Because it's
Yeah.
most of the time it's consumed. So they're targeting food shippers, and they know if it's a high volume food shipper, let's just say it's a high level grocery. I'm not gonna say any high level groceries that may start with a W, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Like they will, but that's what they're targeting
Yeah.
because they know that they're high volume operations that's going on, and they may not be looking at the paperwork very
Enough
closely.
paperwork.
They may
Yeah.
not be looking at their order and comparing it to the bill of lading. So they're hoping that under that guise of just day-to-day operations, they're able to commit this fraud and really theft of taking product off that shipment, adjusting the quantity count on that shipment, and then delivering all these shipments short.
Right.
And they'll usually hit a a, a, a large amount to the point where once it's finally discovered what they're doing, it's shipments that may be $15,000 in value, $20,000 in value. But if they hit 100, 200, 300, well, that value goes up. And now you
Yeah.
have 200 losses valuing $3 million, 4 million.
Right.
And how do you combat that? How do you take that to your insurance company and say, I'm about to submit 300 claims to you guys on all these shipments?
Yeah.
Um,
What a nightmare.
and and they're like, "What is this?" And we're unaware. And has a police report been made? Who makes the police report? Who's the victim? Who's does is the broker responsible for making the police report? Is the shipper responsible for making the police report? So there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of it's very convoluted,
Yeah.
this type of scam, and that's what the bad guys are hoping for. And in all that time, when you finally figure it out, okay, the right party to call the police, who's involved, all that good stuff, that MC is shut down.
Yeah.
It's been shut down for 3 months,
Yeah.
and they've reopened and reincarnated to another MC that you're unaware of, and they're continuing on that scam.
Yeah.
They're as soon as they receive those claims, right? Because as a broker, we're supposed to facilitate those claims
Yep.
to the underlying carrier. So if that underlying carrier is a bad guy, as soon as they get one claim, I'm shutting down my MC. I'm opening
Yep.
up another one.
This is chump change, but because it is added up, and chump, obviously I know $15,000 is not chump change to the average person, but to a
Right.
business, it's like rather than like a $200,000 shipment at one time getting hit, it's that $10,000, $15,000 over X amount of time. And then I think they really study that receiver on knowing, how often do they inventory. I feel like they got an insider at the receiver, but that, whatever. Maybe they used to work at that receiver and
Maybe
they
you
did their
can.
warehousing. Who knows? Like how would they know? So yeah, it's an interesting tactic. And like you said, the carrier looks totally fine. And so that's why I think is the most scariest part of it is like you may have a carrier who's like the best and he wants to run your lanes and he will dedicate and he's the best guy in the whole wide world. Or that same person could be somebody super shady. So
Yeah.
do you guys have any preventative things that you've seen while looking at like really digging into people after the fact and been like, oh, well, actually there was this one little sign from like X amount like, are they buying MCs, holding on to them for a long time? Are you seeing any type of pattern at all?
Yeah. So from our initial investigation, it seems to be carriers that are primarily based in Chicagoland.
Okay.
I'll say that. That's one trend that I've started to see. And I was like, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
And then for the most part, we're trying to figure out if there's some organization surrounded around it as well too. I do know that the FBI has been looking into it, so it does seem as though there's some interstate activity where they're crossing straight state lines and stealing freight here and there. But primarily what I'm seeing is it's domestic crews.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect too is what are you targeting, right?
Yeah.
So I like to tell folks, go to your local convenience store or gas station, corner store, bodega if you're in like the Northeast or something like that. Go there and look at the items that are being sold.
Hmm.
That's what's being targeted.
Yeah. which is
It's
Gator.
honey buns, it's
Yeah.
Little Debbie's,
Yeah.
it's Kraft mac and cheese.
Yeah. It's literally
It's
everything. It's crazy. Yeah.
It's it's crazy, and what we're also finding is this freight is not leaving the United States.
Mm,
We have a lot of There's a lot of instances, especially with fictitious pickups, where we're seeing those targeted commodities, like let's say apparel, electronics, what have you. They're being targeted by international crews and then making its way out of the country.
yeah.
This is being sold domestically. So the major buyers of this stolen goods are me and you,
Wow.
are the shoppers that shop on Amazon, that go to these convenience stores. That's where these items are being sold. They're being
That's
sold on Amazon, eBay, and in your local convenience stores. And you don't know you're
wow.
purchasing stolen freight. You
Yeah.
don't know. You have no clue.
Wow. Because there's not like serial numbers like there is electronics, Yeah, that they can
Exactly.
just kinda do whatever. No, it's funny, my
Right.
one of my girlfriends, she was like, "Hey, I found this website, I can buy designer this for X dollars, like, so cheap, and they say it's real." I'm like, "You know that's stolen freight, right? This is what I fight against, like, stop buying from them." She's like, "But it's so
Yeah.
much cheaper," and yeah, but same thing, like, can be all sorts of different types of freight, so and I think what I think is really interesting is because I actually talked to, like, Nolan Transportation, they got hit, and it was Best Buy that was their customer, and part of it was like the customer neglect. Like you guys should have done inventory X amount of time, and otherwise you're not hitting me with this huge claim because how in the world do you even really know it's me? How do you know it's not actually stolen from your warehouse? Like how do you know? You don't really know.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's probably the biggest struggle right now as a broker is like how do you kind of take the risk away from you and put it on something? And a lot of people are negotiating shipper contracts and making sure that they have it worded in there. I guess my question to you is have you guys implemented anything with your customers? Because I do think it's difficult for smaller brokers. Not that you guys are smaller, but smaller
Mhm.
brokers where you don't really dictate the terms on your customer. You're just happy you have a customer. You're like, whatever I got to do to move your freight, I'll do anything. Like I'll
Right.
jump up and down 5 times and then I'll bid on your load. Sure, whatever you ask. But I think the larger guys are the ones that are going to have to be the ones to like push this through and hammer it through, shipper and receivers' heads that like you have to do this or we're not paying. But yeah, I would love to hear your perspective on what you guys are doing or what you've advised other people to do or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So twofold. So we kind of look at it from a preventive standpoint, ensuring that, we're looking at insurance coverages, not only from our contingent standpoint, but also utilizing shippers' interests, all risk policies
Okay.
for clients that, may have had gotten hit had a lot of issues because it's just more additional insurance coverage to protect them, especially if they're continuously getting hit. But then the other aspect too is educating the facility, educating the shippers, the consignees, what have you, and saying, hey, you need to have a process in place to check the BOL against the purchase order.
Yeah.
Another thing you can implement is EBOLs. EBOLs is something as soon as that purchase order is created and the shipper starts to create that bill of lading, that if you have a EBOL program, that BOL will be instantly shared with the receiver
Right.
if they're a part of that program. So any changes to that, it would be hard to make. I can't now run that through an AI tool
Right.
and change the quantity because you already see the actual quantity on the EBOL. So
Right.
those are the things that we've been educating folks on. And then the other aspect too is utilizing covert GPS trackers. Now, the issue with that is the value of these shipments that are being targeted are typically low.
Yeah.
But again, it is an option. If you're using a covert GPS tracker that has maybe a light sensor, then those light sensors can identify when the doors are being opened and breached prior to it arriving to the consignee. And that's what we're seeing is that they're breaching the truck, whether they're removing the doors off the hasp or the bolt of the hasp is on the outside. So they're just removing the nut and removing the
Yeah.
seal intact. That
Yeah.
way it can still enter the truck. That's what they're doing, right? So if you put a covert GPS with a light sensor on that, hidden in the trailer somewhere,
Yeah.
and they open the doors, light comes in, and then you'll be alerted immediately that something's going on. So, and again, there's a lot of look at the hot spots in and around the United States where they have a lot of warehouses because those are your biggest fencing operations. So that's your Chicagoland area, your LA land area, Dallas, Miami, Florida, port cities. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing too, port cities. So a lot of port cities have a lot of freight forwarding warehouses and third party warehouses that's combining freight and consolidating freight,
Yeah.
for their clients. Well, they're typically looking at a lot of these locations and areas to be able to remove that freight and then fence that freight. And because they're high populated areas, they can fence that freight and sell it to convenience stores in and around that greater metropolitan area. So something that just always kind of look out for is the area in which things are moving as well too.
But I think you're making a good point with those type of warehouses that handle so many different types of freight. Like they're not counting everything that they can count as regularly. Wow, I cannot speak, as like a warehouse dedicated to a certain commodity. So yeah, that's a great
Hmm.
point. I didn't even think about that. Last time you and me talked, we talked about the EBOL thing, and you brought up a really interesting point where some shippers are like scared to have the expense of it, or they don't want to have the expense of it. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with the headache. So almost like offering that as like a product or project management thing for them, like, hey, tacking on X amount of dollars to their shipment that you quote on, and then that's part of your services are that you provide the EOL, you communicate with the receiver. I guess if you want to elaborate more on that, because you were the brains behind that whole suggestion. That was like mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's giving our clients options, right? We want to give them options, especially if they may have experience or may been a victim of this. And like I said, a lot of the times what we're seeing is it's the high volume shippers that are being targeted.
Yeah,
So even though the values are low, it's not like they don't have the necessary budgets to implement it. They may have to strategically move some dollars around and things of that nature. But again, it's really just optional. Do you care that you get the best price
right.
on your freight charges, or do you want your freight to be delivered securely and without issue, right? And a
Yeah,
lot of times, a lot of our shippers will be like, "I want both,"
yeah,
and they want to have it all, right?
right.
But in a perfect world, we would love to give them all. But again, I always say, well, what is more important? Because we don't live in a perfect world. The world isn't perfect, and if you care more about mitigating risk, then you have to understand that there's going to be more costs
Yeah,
associated with mitigating your risk. And if you want to save more dollars, that's fine, but there's more inherent risk that you're going to be taking if you're looking to save more money. So option is yours, and that's how we kind of educate. We just say, hey, option is yours, but if you're seeing you're having an issue and you're losing money
yeah,
as a business, we have solutions to stop that. And unfortunately, I wish all these solutions were free.
right.
We'll give you the free suggestions because we
Yeah,
love you,
yeah,
but then if you really, really, really wanna stop the issue from happening, it's all about I always use this example. If your house got broken into, you have an option. You can say, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna file an insurance claim and not do anything about it." Or you can say, "I have an issue. Let me go call an alarm company
yeah,
and get an alarm installed in my house to prevent that from happening again." It's a minimal cost, but it's a cost that I have to pay to make sure that my house is protected.
yeah.
And that's the same thing that we're educating the shippers and consignees. You want to protect your house, you gotta spend on security. It's just the bottom line.
Well, and almost like if they do decide to opt out of that and they don't want that option, well, then in your contract, you're specifying that this isn't hitting me. It's not my fault you said
Exactly.
no. Um, but I
Yep.
definitely think giving them options, but then and almost giving them two different type of contracts. Like, hey, I know we're going to be a new client of yours, super excited to service you. Option one, you have full security ramping of this. Option two, this. I think that's a
Yep.
great way of positioning it and putting the power back into the broker's hand instead of everything just because for so long, I think we've really depended on shippers to dictate everything. And I think that's changed a lot with the fraud,
Yeah.
taking back that control and, basically, like you said, a big part of it is educating. So educating, but then giving options. I
Yeah.
love where your head's
Absolutely.
at. I love all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you brought up a good point, contracts. I think it's also important to kind of point out like market conditions, right?
Yeah.
And we've been in a little bit of a shipper's market, so it's tougher when you're in a shipper's market to make revisions and red lines and
Yes.
shippers contracts. But I think that there's certain conditions that's in the market currently, even right now as we speak, with everything that's going on the driver side of things, and the English proficiency tests, and the drivers not having CDLs and not being on work visas. I think it's going to start kind of flipping that more so from a shipper's market into a driver's market, because capacity is going to be a little bit of a concern. So right now is a good time when you're going into a potential RFP or a potential renewed contract with your clients, and bringing up these aspects, especially if you're looking at that overall, all the loads that you've been running on that particular account, the losses that account has taken on, and saying,
Mhm.
okay, well, look, you've had X amount of losses, totaling this dollar amount. So to mitigate this moving forward in contract, we need
Right.
to implement A, B, C, D from a security standpoint, or we need to mitigate our risk exposure or limit our liability in contract, based on what we're seeing in the market and based on this information here. So we're actually bringing actual bona fide facts, and bringing that to a contract review to say, look, we want to be the best option, and we want you guys to go with us, right? And we don't
Right.
want to be too difficult, because sometimes when you return a shipper's contract with so many red lines, they're not going to want to talk to you. They just go to the broker
Next
who has
one.
the least amount of red lines or no red lines, right? But what they're not understanding is, when stuff hits the fan with that particular broker, are you really going to be protected? Is
Yeah.
that broker in the financial ability to not only protect their own interests, but protect your interests if something was to happen, right? Have
Right.
you really reviewed their contingent cargo policy to see if they even have coverage if something was to happen, right? So again, it's a lot of things that kind of come with, the contractual side of things. And a lot of times I like to say no contract should go just signed without having a communication with two legal departments, coming together and educating each other of the risks and perils that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Okay, why did you guys ask for this limitation of liability when it comes to strategic thefts and whatever? Well, the reason why is ABCD, because we're
Yeah.
seeing an increase in strategic thefts, and we're just implementing some type of limited liability if you're releasing the shipment to someone other than the carrier who I hired. We
Right.
shouldn't be we shouldn't be liable for a loss if I hire ABC Logistics and you load XYZ trucking.
Because you don't check any.
Why should I be liable for that? You
I told
you
you.
loaded the wrong truck, right? So again, it's again educating them in that legal department to say, well, we're really well versed in what we're seeing in the industry in regards to theft and fraud,
Yeah.
and risk mitigation, and this is why we've implemented this. Or there's simply some things we just can't agree to.
Yeah.
We're not a carrier, we're a broker, so we can't take on motor carrier liability as a broker. That's in law. So a lot of times you have to push back on that aspect as well in contracts.
Well, I think that's a good point. And even as a very small broker, I think a lot of times you are really nervous to talk about like making those red lines and things like that. I think actually in a shipper's mind, it makes it seem like you're bigger than you are. You know what you're talking about. Like he's so well versed in, fraud that he knows to do all these redlining or whatever. And I think on top of that, prior to like hitting them back with redlining, it's also understanding their process. What is your actual process that you guys have in place for loading? What's your actual process in place that you have for your receivers? Do you require receivers to do certain aspects of the, BOL or whatever, the inventory, whatever it is? Like what is
Yep.
your internal theft prevention as well? And then you can almost take their words verbatim. Like if they're like, I check this every single time. Okay, perfect. You said you did this. I'm going to put this in the contract because you said you did it. You're going to sign
Right.
off on it because that's what you said you do. So if you
Right.
deviate from that, here we are. Um, so yeah, I think
Sure.
that's a great point on how to do it at really at any level of being a new broker to a established broker. So awesome.
Absolutely.
Where do you see fraud going? Like, are you thinking AI next is the big hit, or where do you see it going?
Yeah, yeah. I think that the bad guys are going, and again, they're just trying to isolate themselves as much as possible
Mhm.
without ever being discovered that they're committing theft and fraud.
Right.
So if I can buy that I can control and I can dictate and I can set a, certain set of rules to operate on my behalf,
If you're from outside the United States, that they never can come find me. Yeah.
Right, they can never come find me, right? Because you'll be looking for a bot,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like, I think, and that's what I'm really worried about is that it's already really tough from an investigative aspect to deter international crews from stealing because of jurisdictional issues.
Right.
Or even our federal law enforcement can't go into certain jurisdictions and arrest these international theft rings that's committing all this stuff and fraud in our supply chain, right?
Right.
So they know that, but I think in turn, even to combat, even to further remove themselves from ever being discovered, they're going to start utilizing AI bots more. So I
Yeah.
just think that until there's more being done from a preventive standpoint, from a government standpoint, from a arresting these bad guys and these bad guys understanding that them being arrested is a potential deterrent, not just deportation or
Right.
probation, but actual strong laws on the books to really stop this and enforcement, actual
And
resources and
enforcement.
enforcement to
Yeah.
stop this. They're just going to continue to evolve in their modus operandi of how they commit theft and fraud. I think I used this example during a TIA meeting in Birmingham, but we say what gave way to all this strategic theft and fraud, and especially with cluster thefts, is the show Breaking Bad. And in that show, Breaking Bad, which is one of my favorite shows, one of the best shows of all time.
Yeah.
But they had a person on the inside. I think they were stealing some type of chemical, methylidome or methylene or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But they were stealing barrels out of a warehouse that were holding these barrels. And they had someone on the inside that was adjusting the packing list and the bill of ladings to show that this product never delivered, so that way they can remove these drums.
Yeah.
And the bad guys picked up on that and they were like, oh, we could do that, but we could do that with anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? They can do that with
And then
anything. But
Cluster Theft
now,
was born. Thanks, Breaking Bad.
and cluster tests, thanks, Bryan Cranston.
Yeah. For sure.
But which one of my favorite actors. I love him. I love him. But yeah, but that's Hollywood sometimes gives way to the bad guys to
Yeah.
then say, oh, this is something that's interesting and I can actually implement this and I'll make a couple of tweaks here and there and then I can commit this fraud being anywhere in the world
Yeah.
and make millions and millions of dollars and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
I can have a bot do it. They'll just run on automatic and
I'll be
I'll
sitting
just
on the
be in the Bahamas
Yeah.
sipping some Bahama Mamas and making money against the US supply chain and we don't
Right.
even know it.
Well, and a lot of people are like, if only the bad guys use all their wit for good. It's like they're actually killing it and making more money for bad, which is really unfortunate. But they're doing such little work for what their reward is, and their consequences are so low that it's like, why would they stop? That's why I think you make a great point with the whole everything government wise needs to be stricter. I mean, like whenever we started the war on drugs, I mean, that went like full blown war on drugs. Everybody who had anything on them got arrested for like a
Yeah.
billion years. Like, why not do a war on freaking, logistics theft? I don't know how they would,
Yeah.
categorize it, but I mean, that it does take on X amount of dollars to each consumer's spend. And that's like the big thing with the government right now is they're trying to fix the economic crisis. But here we are with strategic theft. And we know this being in the industry, but I think getting this outside of logistics and talking to it with your cousin, your grandma, you're a neighbor, whoever, because you don't know what they do for a living. So you are going to the TIA policy forum in DC, right? Because I actually cannot make
Yes.
it. My daughter's birthday is that day. I'm so upset. She was born that
Aw.
day. I'm just kidding. Not
A great reason not to go.
I know,
Yes.
but
Understand.
I really wanted to go, so I'm excited for that. What do you look to accomplish kind of while you're out there, or what's your game plan?
Yeah, so there's a couple of bills right now that have been presented on the Congress floor. So we have one of them is believe called Cobra, which
Yeah.
is the consumer yada yada yada. There's so
Okay, I'm
many.
not gonna hold you to this. It's okay. We'll throw it in.
Yeah. It's let's just say there's a bill, but basically what it does is this bill will help the FMCSA really start to shut down any type of carriers that and actually have resources and enforcement to shut down carriers where they're receiving any type of reports of fraudulent activity,
Yeah.
and really just give them more investigative power, right? More
Yes.
authority to really investigate these things, shut it down, get these trucking companies shut down that are, again, that are hiding under the guise of being legitimate and they're really not. We've been saying for a long time that the FMCSA, unfortunately, they're compromised, and they've been compromised by these international theft rings. They
Yeah.
know it. So they need to do more on their end, in regard to two-factor authentication on folks that are getting set up, right? How do you verify that these businesses are legitimate?
Yeah.
Ensuring that these people are actually based and domiciled in the United States. That could be a pretty big change as well too, because
Yeah.
it's nothing for them to go set up a virtual address or a PO box, without ever being there, right? And again, we want to stop that. Or the fact that there's been instances of MCs, of hundreds of or thousands of MCs being set up out of the same address location.
Right.
Like,
What the heck?
shut that down. FMCSA, like, you
For
need to
real.
shut that down. You need to shut that down immediately. So that's giving them that ability to do that. But then it's also giving more investigative resources to federal law enforcement,
Yeah.
Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, the DOT, to really start really investigating and helping
As a
the
unit
industry
too.
investigate this
Yeah.
type of fraud and theft, right? And maybe putting more stringent laws on the books to really deter these bad guys.
Right.
I'm not saying that this is going to catch them, but if they knew, hey,
Yeah.
what I'm doing could potentially get me 20 years in jail instead of 2 years probation, I may want to rethink this type of
Right.
career move, right?
Right.
So that's what we're going there to talk about. There's also some things, I have a passion and affinity to fraud, but also when it comes to other brokers and things that are important, like rate transparency. That's something that we're going to talk about as well
Yeah.
too, making sure that they understand our perspective. I like to say all the time when I give this example, when I've done a policy forum before regarding rate transparency, but it's like going to Kroger and going to your cashier and saying, how much did you pay the farmer for these tomatoes?
Yeah.
Nowhere in the history of the United States and our free enterprise, free market system do we have to let folks know what our margins are.
Right.
And right now, that's the big thing with rate transparency. But from my understanding and listening to carriers and understanding their perspective, what they're really trying to fight when it comes to rate transparency is hidden fees by brokers. So, from TIA's perspective, we want to stop the predatory practice of brokers adding in hidden fees against carriage and really start, if you're going to have a fee schedule,
Right.
making sure to identify that in contract and making it really clear as day that the carriers understand and that it's
Prior
not
to
hidden.
everything.
Right. They need to be privy to it because that's what they want.
Right.
And they'll back off of really pushing for this rate transparency if reputable brokers will stop hitting them with all these fees, deducting all these rates, and trying to make an extra buck or two in margin off
Right.
of drivers.
Which is
Drivers are a backbone of our nation, and guess what? I am totally in a line with OIDA
yeah.
and TIA and with our carriers when it comes to that regard.
Me too.
But that means all reputable. If you're calling yourself a reputable broker, that means you have to be doing business the right way.
Yeah.
Stop trying to steal from nickel and dime your truck drivers.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Totally.
Like,
Totally.
they are our lifeline. It's very important that we take care of them, right?
Yeah.
But again, that in turn means that maybe brokers need to now work with carriers to make sure that they're getting better rates and that they're going back to shippers. They're not having all this risk exposure. So that
Right.
means brokers got to start stepping up and working on behalf of carriers. This is the time to do it. If
Right.
market conditions about to change, this is a time when we need to come together with carriers, be stronger together, and say, "Hey, you want your shipments picked up, Mr. Shipper? Have to meet our demands, right? And we have to support our carriers for it, and we're completely behind that." So, even though we may talk about rate transparency, it's very important that is not an attack on truck drivers or OIDA and their backing of it, right? Or their understanding of it, right? It's to say that we hear you, we understand, we understand exactly what the issue
Yeah.
is
For
with them.
real. If you, yeah.
there's maybe a better way to go about it that doesn't expose brokers and what margins they make, right?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you from our perspective, we weren't making that
Right.
much.
Yeah, and here's my
It wasn't us. I promise you that it wasn't us. And unfortunately, it
do have you do have to have a margin to if fraud does happen, you have to have something to be able to pay that out or you go out of business. It's like I think the same thing where it's like if carriers really understood the risk and the amount of money that you have to have in your bank account to be okay as a broker is way more than you need as a carrier. There's a big difference there. So margins there. To be fair, I was a carrier sales rep for 8 years, and yeah, 1,000,000,000%. I had those drivers who I know 1,000% was at their girlfriend's house and they were late on purpose, and they should have told me that they were not delivering until they got to hang out with their girlfriend. And I was like, "You're getting hit with the late fee, whatever. You wrecked my weekend, whatever it was, you know." So
right.
there's a lot of give and take in logistics period, and carriers should act a certain way, brokers should act a certain way. Obviously we're always going to butt head on things, but I think it's having the open dialogue on things is what's so big. So I'm glad that
Yeah.
there's platforms out there that are talking, podcasts out there is happening. There's like the broker carrier summit that's happening.
Yep.
A bunch of different things like that that people are actually coming together and talking, because that is at the end of the day what really needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And regarding late fees, like again, if I'm contracted as a broker,
Yeah.
and if a shipment arrives late and I'm hit with certain late fee, that I mean, I'm not going to argue that. Like I have to apply that late fee,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about
Right.
the hidden fees that's making the brokers extra money that they're not being charged back by their shippers, right?
Right.
That's predatory,
No,
right?
totally get it. Yeah.
And we want to support that. We're TIA. We're here not only on behalf of brokers but on behalf of carriers, and to hear those reports of predatory practices by brokers. So that way, if we see, especially if they're a TIA member,
Right.
we want to investigate that and we want to stop that because we want to show brokers in the best light possible. We're not here to. We want to make money, but we're not here to just use drivers and steal their livelihoods. We want to make sure that they're making money. We just want to help our clients as well too, and we want to be a help to our carrier network as well too, to make sure that we're keeping them, giving them loads and keeping them loaded, and making sure they're getting paid a fair wage, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
that's
great
what we're
point.
all about,
Yeah.
and we
Great
just
point.
need to support that.
And I think TIA does a really good job at educating brokers on how to be a good broker. Like it's not just here's how to run a brokerage. It's like, no, this is how to run a great brokerage, not just like
Right.
one that the names run down the mill. So yeah,
And when you're a great broker, more carriers want to work with you. Oh man, they're fair. They pay good, and then all that does is that gives you a larger network to
yeah,
be more competitive from a pricing standpoint, to where you can now make better margins as a broker because more carriers want to work with you
yeah,
because you're so stand up. So I think we just got to get back to that. I
yeah,
think
for
it's
sure.
it's been shippers market conditions are starting to change. So now it's time for us to have the back of the carriers and say, this is what, even if it comes to late fees and I got to make a red line on late fees, and oh, I want to charge that driver 300. Well, can you charge them 100?
Right.
Can we at least negotiate
Or
this?
like,
And that's working on behalf of carriers because we
yeah.
understand stuff happens.
And
It's
I used to eat
transportation.
late fees all the time whenever it was legit. The guy broke down, whatever happened. Like I know 100% this was a legit thing. The driver had no control in it. Yeah. So like it's like doing the right thing on that part and eating some margins to do the right thing is huge. You don't want to be that broker where in the comments it says no X broker name, like you don't want to be that one where you're
Right.
literally, all over the load board as being the bad guy. But well, I
Right.
really appreciate you coming on here. And like I said, we're going to have to do this again because I want to hear all your other vetting tips that you have. But I think the BOL cluster theft stuff is like top to me. It is like the biggest thing that's happening. Financial impact. It's the largest financial impact thing that's happening right now. It's one thing that nobody has a clear answer on how to stop or prevent because it is so. Like you said, the guys look great. They look squeaky clean, and usually they were operating great. And maybe you got like a bad apple that just came in, or who knows? Like I said, they all met up at a truck stop and decided to have this grand scheme. Like there's so many different factors. It's just wild. But thank you so much for coming on. And like, so we'll have to have you on again.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'll be back. Whenever you need me.
Love it. And you're an ATL, so you're right down the road. So yay.
I'm right down the road. That's right. That's right. We can always do it again whenever.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Bye, everybody.